think let's go ahead and get started, and if folks want to trickle in, they can. So for a formal introduction, we've got Dr. Sam joining us again, who had previously joined to talk about gait analysis. I know at least a couple of us have done a gait analysis with Dr. Sam, including myself. That was really helpful. And today, he's here to talk about Achilles, keeping your Achilles strong and healthy. I am probably the worst possible host for this because I'm currently working with Dr. Sam on rehabbing my Achilles after just abusing it for far too long. But hopefully we can at least prevent other people from having the same drawn out rehab experience that I'm having currently.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Let me share my screen here and then we'll get rolling. Cool. So I have just a few slides here. If you guys have questions, just raise your hand in the Zoom or just holler or whatever, let me know. I do have time for Q&A at the very end. So if you guys do have specific questions, more than happy to answer them and to really help you guys out with Achilles. All right. Um, so, like Andrew slash Kristen said, I am Dr. Sam Rauchwarter. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then ended up getting my doctorate in physical therapy up in Fargo. I went on to do a sports residency down in Tucson, and that's actually where I met Kristen. And then from that residency, essentially, I really started to fall in love with treating endurance athletes. So I definitely specialize in treating endurance athletes. I've been lucky enough to treat professional triathletes, runners, cyclists, swimmers, baseball players, NFL players, everyone under the sun. And my work now takes me all over the world. So I also work with USA Triathlon. They fly me all over the world and work with their Olympians to essentially make sure that they stay healthy for their races. Currently, I reside in Phoenix, but I treat in Phoenix 4 days a week, and then I treat down in Tucson every Thursday. So I do have both essentially clinic locations, as well as obviously online here, which we're going to talk about here a little bit. But Achilles, as many of you know, probably what the Achilles is. However, why the heck does it matter? Okay, and why are you guys on here today? Essentially, Achilles injury is one of the most common running injuries. Period. Um, it can sideline athletes for weeks, months. It can take them completely out of running, completely out of sport, everything in between. So it's really important that we talk about Achilles and know what to do. So, quick kind of overview of what we're going to kind of talk about here today: anatomy and function of Achilles, common injuries, myths, how to prevent the Achilles injuries slash manage Achilles injuries, and then some like actual like practical takeaways, some things that you guys can actually do, and a few key exercises as well. The goal of today and this talk really is to give you guys knowledge about how to recognize your Achilles issue early and then potentially give you some prevention and treatment guidance. I will caveat that I am a medical professional. So if at any point in time you guys are uncomfortable with any of that, please go seek medical advice and a medical professional if it's all overwhelming. All right. Quick overview of what the Achilles tendon is. So it's right on the picture, it's right on that blue. And essentially, it's the thickest, strongest tendon in our body. All right. It can absorb an insane amount of force. When you go and you run, you're putting anywhere from 3 to 9 times your body weight through your Achilles, which is pretty wild to think about that it can hold that much force. Talking sometimes thousands of pounds for some of my bigger NFL guys. For you guys, maybe not necessarily thousands and thousands of pounds, but a lot of force. And the point still holds still, all right, or holds true. The Achilles really is made of two main muscles. One is the gastroc, or the gastrocnemius, which is when you think of like your calf muscle. Okay, so the main meat of the calf muscle, that's your gastrocnemius or your gastroc. The other one is called your soleus, and the soleus is a thinner, almost like pancake-like muscle, and that sits directly between the gastroc and your bone. So it kind of sits in between. It's really thin, and it goes down there, and you can actually see like the top of the blue portion here. Oh, I was going to see if I can have a pointer, but anyways, the top of the blue portion up there, right where that is, that's where they start to fuse. Okay, so those muscles, the gastroc and the soleus, literally fuse together to create your Achilles tendon. Then obviously it comes all the way down and it attaches onto the point of the foot. All right, I actually have a little foot model here. A lot of us know the Achilles. If I can get them out. Here we go. All right, a lot of us know our lovely Achilles, and here's actually where it inserts. So here's your foot to give you an example. Okay, here's your foot, kind of a little bent hammer toe there, but it attaches right here at the heel. And we'll talk more about this versus other things, but this is the most common site that people start to have pain in, at the heel, and then what we call the mid portion. Okay. The Achilles, though, is really important and essential for running, jumping, force absorption, right? So when you guys are talking about running, clearly for the running, but also force absorption, right? So the Achilles plays a really critical role in trying to absorb a lot of the forces. So then it doesn't go up to your ankle, your knee, your hip, your low back, which unfortunately we're all runners. I'm sure at one point in time we have felt pain in all of those areas while running. The Achilles can definitely play a role in absorbing that force. The Achilles and why it's prone to injury. All right. The Achilles, we talked about the stress and forces that it absorbs, but the most important piece, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds, we'll get back out of the weeds here in a second, but the most important piece of the Achilles is that it has decreased blood flow. So if you look at this lovely drawing here, essentially you can see the spot where it has the blue box in there, and you can see all of essentially the kind of blood vessels that come to it. In that portion of the Achilles, there's very, very little blood flow. Your Achilles and any other part of your body needs blood flow to bring those nutrients to try and heal that. Okay. And that's why the Achilles takes so dang long to heal, is because it has a poor blood supply. All right. So that blood supply is not super strong. And so it just takes a long time for those nutrients, the collagen, everything, all the healing properties that we have with circulating our body throughout our blood. It just takes a long time to get there because there's no direct route. Okay. I'd like to tell people, think of it like as if you're flying into an airport, right? Say you're flying into, let's say, Colorado, right? Colorado is an easy example. Most of us know Colorado, right? If you fly into Denver International Airport, it's out there, right? And let's say you need to get to Vail, right? Yeah, there's a highway, or say, yeah, there's a highway, but you have to go up over the mountain and around the curve and up and down, right? Like it takes a long time to get there. Versus if you need to go to Colorado Springs, it's a straight shot down the highway. It's super fast, right? That's the same thing that happens with our blood supply to our Achilles. You have to go up over the mountain, over, up and around downtown, all the way through the mountains, all the way to get to that area. Okay. So that's really important to understand why it takes so long for that Achilles to heal. All right. Biomechanical factors, that's a fancy word for essentially saying if you have tight calves, weak posterior chain, so calves, hips, hamstrings, or if you have poor foot mechanics, that can all overload the tendon. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to touch on gait analysis real fast, but otherwise, though, that's something though that we also want to keep in mind. So when we talk about Achilles tendon and the injuries, when you have to go through that process to try and get that Achilles back, it really important to double check all these things and to do a gait analysis. All right. Common Achilles injuries. All right. Here's what everyone wants to know. And everyone can probably relate to that graph if they've had any sort of tendon injury ever. But essentially, tendon injuries can be up and down. The biggest thing to think about is you have two different main types of tendon injuries. Okay. One is called the tendinitis. That's acute inflammation, generally happens like pretty quickly. It is characterized by warmth, swelling. Think of it like you just happened and it's kind of warm and hot and angry at you. Then you have what's called, and we call that a hot, like a hot inflammation, right? So it's warm, it's swelled, all that kind of thing. When you have tendinopathy, that's what we call a chronic version of it. So you guys as runners, myself as a runner, more common with this population because we use it over and over and over and over again. And we're not always the fastest to get help for it. But once we do, then essentially it takes a little bit of time to start making these changes. So you have essentially, once you get into that chronic stage, you have micro tears, thickening, and it's very common for it to feel like a roller coaster. One day it feels good, the next day it feels bad, then the day after that it feels good again, and then it's kind of in the middle, and then it feels great, and then you go out for a long run, and then it doesn't feel good again, right? Like that's a very common thing, and it's due to a lot of just those micro tears and that thickening, and your tendon actually trying to rebuild itself. All right, insertional versus mid portion. So here are the two different types. I kind of broke it down into a little table, and I have a nice little graphic there. But essentially, you have tendonitis and tendinopathy, so acute and chronic, and then you have different locations for where they are. Okay, so insertional versus mid portion. So insertional is the back of the heel. It's right where it attaches to the bone. We kind of briefly touched on that. Oftentimes, it is worsened by stretching. Stretching feels terrible. Why? Because you're pulling that tendon from the bone and it doesn't feel good. I'm sure everyone has probably had some of that where you stretch, you're like, oh man, what the heck is this? This does not feel good. All right, so that's insertional. It happens right on the heel, the back of the heel. All right, mid portion, a little higher up in the calf. All right, and you can see that white portion of it. That's still the tendon through there. Oftentimes it's worsened by running. It's worse in the early morning. People talk and complain about it being really stiff, especially like the first couple steps getting out of bed. Very, very common for that to happen. It is also more common in runners because generally speaking, that insertion tends to be a little bit tighter or a little bit tighter and a little bit more set. But further up is kind of where that tendon is starting to break down and pull apart. And so that's kind of where we land ourselves is in that mid portion, Achilles tendinopathy. Other Achilles related injuries, we'll just touch on this really quick. Partial tears, not fun. Don't do that, please. It's a very sharp, sudden pain. People say that like it stops them in their tracks. And oftentimes it may require imaging or essentially getting some sort of MRI to diagnose that partial tear. By that point, you're out of running for a while, and you should probably see some medical advice and some PT for that. Ruptures. I hope no one ever experiences this. It's a complete tear. People say they feel like they've been kicked in the calf. People say they feel like they've been shot in the back of the leg. They oftentimes hear a pop. That is surgery ASAP, and that is a long road to recovery. So let's not do that either. We're going to try and prevent that from happening. Please, please, please. All right. Haglund deformity. Have you guys heard of Haglund deformity before? I see a couple heads nodding. All right. So Haglund deformity essentially is a bony growth off the back of that heel, or off the back of that heel. All right. So here's my heel, and it's essentially a bony growth right here. All right. Right at that end of that heel. What happens? That bony growth goes and it starts to protrude and push into that Achilles. And then it creates a hot spot. It doesn't feel great. There's a lot of different things that you can look at for it. Some people say it's considered like it happens because of improper footwear. There's definitely a genetic side to it as well. And so there's a lot going on there. That's a little bit more complex of an issue. Again, if that is the case, please seek medical advice. I'm happy to talk to anyone too who's experiencing any and all of these things to help you guys try and get back on track. All right, a quick break here. Achilles miss. Any guesses? I have 4 Achilles miss, and I hear them all the time. And I just kind of smirk and smile whenever I hear them. Do you guys have any ideas about the Achilles miss? Nothing, nothing. All right.
That rest is the only solution.
There's one. There's one. I love it. There's one, which is probably the one that I hear the most common. They're like, yeah, it started hurting. I took some rest and it only got worse. I know.
I
I know.
I'm mostly listening to this because my boyfriend's dealing with Achilles problems. So
Nice.
what I've
Well,
been
you'll have to. Nice. Yes, you'll have to. Yeah, yeah. So you've heard all this before. All right. But yeah, you'll have to pass this on to him for sure and have him watch it. He'll love it. Um, all right. That is exactly myth number one. The thing that I feel that I hear the most often. I'm just gonna rest. It'll go away. Right? Healing, it'll take time. You just gotta take time off running. Unfortunately, rest alone won't fix it. Okay. The tendons in general, they love to be used. They love loading. That's why, like, when you get on an Achilles tendon program, and I'm sure Andrew can say this, I have him doing something every single day. And it's repetitive. It might be a little boring, but it's exactly what your Achilles needs in order to try and get up and over that hump. It needs consistency and it needs to be loaded the right way, in the right fashion, in the right progression. And so just resting it won't go away. The second myth that I always hear, if we're playing Mythbusters here, is stretching is the answer. Oh, I'm just going to stretch it a bunch, it'll go away. Stretching won't happen either. It won't bother it either because it's already an irritated tendon, right? So if you're, especially insertional, right? We talked about the one that attaches right here. If you keep pulling on it, it's like a scab that you keep picking, right? It's just going to keep bleeding, keep just not going to heal very well, right? So if you have that insertional tendinopathy, it's only going to actually make it worse. So that's why it's really important when I start working with runners is to figure out what they're doing, where they're at, what they've tried, what they haven't tried, and kind of figuring out what the pain is and what the best course of action is. But oftentimes stretching is not the answer, at least not right away. And if it is, it needs to be done in a very controlled manner and in a very specific manner to be able to not irritate that tendon.
And that is a myth I unfortunately got from another PT that I previously worked with that I think was just, not quite as focused on runners, didn't see this as frequently. And so that's always a little frustrating too when you're working with the PT and the PT says, yeah, we're just going to do some stretching and you're not seeing any improvement.
Yeah, yeah, and unfortunately, it's a very common thing. Tendons are challenging to learn how to treat, um, and that's no knock on PTs. Like it, you just have to see a lot of them, and you have to understand the pathology and the physiology and the anatomy behind the Achilles. And especially when you start working with runners, you have to understand the biomechanics of runners, right? The psychology of runners, dude. Like you're gonna run no matter what. So if I tell you to run or not, like I might as well at least put a little bit of border, a little bit of guardrails on you, right? Because you're gonna run anyways. So that's one thing that I think, when you start looking at runners and like working with runners, that's super important. Unfortunately, that's a bummer that you had that experience, Andrew. But I think that's why it's really important to find someone, either myself or another PT who works with endurance athletes who actually understands this stuff. So then we can work through that process, not against it. All right, myth number three. Um, Older runners get Achilles injuries because they're old and they've been going on forever and they've done way too many miles and they have training errors and whatever. Um, But overall, though, we look at that and we really training errors are probably one of the biggest things. Training and or recovery errors, okay, are one of the biggest things for Achilles injuries. All right. We can chalk it up to poor load management, whatever it is, right? And sometimes I mean, there's a lot of different people to share the blame on this one, especially when we start talking about training errors, right? I don't know about you guys, but if I've been prescribed a 3 mile run, there's been times where I feel good and I go for 4.5. And then there's times where, I'm like, oh, I'm just, I'm just gonna go at, 8-minute mile, and then you get out there and you're feeling good, and you're like at 6:30. And you're like, I'm just gonna rip this one. It feels good, right? So training errors just like that oftentimes are are common triggers for Achilles. By the way, if you guys haven't ever Googled old runner, you get some great pictures. I found these in like 2 seconds, and I was like, these are great. You got an old dude with white hair flowing. You got the raggedy old trail runner guy. You guys might know who he is, and then some lady who's just super pumped to be running. So I love it. Um, cool. Myth number 4. I need new shoes to fix this. Everyone loves to throw shoes. Maybe I've seen people tell me that, like, oh, if I run in these specific shorts, I don't get Achilles pain. I'm like, yeah, okay, buddy. That's not that's not going to prevent your Achilles pain. Um, so oftentimes shoes, yes, they play a role, especially if you have Hagland or something like that. But tendon injuries are mainly due to training load, strength, mechanics, uh, everything, not just footwear. So it's important to take a all-inclusive look at that. Most of the time, footwear is actually one of the last things. If people really start continually struggle with Achilles pain, then I'll look at shoes. But that's oftentimes further down the rabbit hole that I'll go for that.
It's a shame that we have you after our last guest, because it would have been
Uh-oh.
interesting to talk to the shoe expert about. That's something I hear a lot with like the plated shoes and carbon shoes,
Mm.
right? Is that because of how they're sort of reflecting some of the forces back, that people will sometimes experience more calf or Achilles issues with them.
100%. Yes. So carbon plates, I swear were invented by medical providers, because I've seen so many injuries from runners who use carbon plated shoes, and more often than what they should. So, we joke about it, but yes, 100%. The carbon plates, they do deflect a lot of that energy, because normally you have that energy that gets absorbed through the foam of the shoes, and now all of a sudden you have a carbon plate there, and it acts like a little vibration stick, right? And it sends little micro shock waves up through your heel, Achilles, and stuff like that. So if you run in carbon plated shoes all the time, please don't, because you're a ticking time bomb. But wearing carbon plated shoes for faster runs or for races, totally fine. You just need to watch out how much you're doing that. But yes, shoes 100%. Like, I guess the biggest point I want to say with the shoe portion is that buying new shoes isn't going to fix your Achilles. Is it a cause? Maybe if you're running carbon plated shoes all the time. Um, but if you're just going out for your normal runs, you've been fine, fine, fine. Like, you're better off investing your money into your body than into your shoes, if that makes sense. Because your shoes aren't going to fix your Achilles. Um, Cool. So some risk factors for Achilles. All right. We talked about some training errors. All right. So sudden increase in mileage, intensity, or hill running. You guys are all coached, so hopefully these are fewer and far between. However, that doesn't mean that before you had a coach that none of these things ever happened, myself included. I'm just as guilty as everyone else. I know that I've had way too sudden in mileage, intensity, hill runs, distances, all that stuff. It all happens. Biomechanical issues. Again, this is more of the gait analysis side. We'll touch on this here in a minute, but overstriding, limited ankle dorsiflexion, or push-off mechanics. High and low arch foot types can affect tendon loading. Most of the time, there's some bigger rocks that go into it, but it's worth noting that based on your arch type, sometimes that can have some altered loading into your Achilles. Muscle weakness and imbalance. And this is probably what I see one of the most things. One of the most, the biggest thing that you guys can look at is your soleus. That small pancake-like muscle that sits in there. So the soleus handles most of the Achilles loading. All right, your gastroc is mainly for pushing off and flexing your foot downward, and your soleus is mainly for your Achilles and loading that Achilles. So if you have that weak soleus muscle, oftentimes you can start to have some of that weakened pathology start to come in and stuff like that. Poor glute activation affecting gait mechanics. That's another thing. If your booty ain't strong, then you can have some Achilles stuff going on. And then of course, previous history of injury. All right. If you have had a prior Achilles injury, you're more likely to get another one. So all the more important to make sure that you stay on top of it, whether that be a strength training program or cycling in and out of running and stuff like that, all the more important. All right, we're getting to the good stuff, the takeaways. So prevention strategies, gradual progression to training load. There's a classic 10% rule, so 10% per week. Now you guys all have coach, or hopefully you all have coaches. So this should be taken care of from that coaching side. Regular strength training, we talked about it just super briefly there a second ago, but super important. If you're looking at the Achilles specifically, the soleus, the gastroc, and the glutes are super important. If you're looking at overall runner strength training, the whole body is important because you need to be resilient to any sort of injury. That's the strength training is super important. Gait analysis and modifications needed. A shameless plug there for the remote gait analysis by myself. But whether you get it with myself or someone else, it's really important piece to the puzzle for that Achilles pain. Okay, because you can see a lot of different things and tell a lot of different injuries and potential risk factors for injury just from that gait analysis. I'll give you guys one quick example. I saw a professional triathlete yesterday, actually. He's remote. He's from Montana. He flew in from Montana to come see me for the day. And essentially, what we did is I had him send me the gait analysis ahead of time. I did the gait analysis, and I was pointing out things. Hey, I think your hamstrings are a little weak on your left. Your glutes are weak bilaterally, but worse right versus left. Right, like you have kind of like a tilt to the side. We need to work on that. That's more from like your balance and stuff. Then we ended up doing strength testing in person, and it was kind of wild because he was like, "Oh my God, I don't know how you saw all these things in the gait analysis before you even saw me." And I'm like, it's not rocket science, right? But you can see so many things within the gait and pick up so many things that sometimes like I don't need to see you in person 100% of the time to get you a really solid plan and to get you going on exactly what you need to. And that's the power and the importance of gait analysis. All right. So again, whether that's done by myself or someone else, please do that. Same with strength training. I offer strength training. I know you guys have which something. Which weight? Thank you. Not which. That's the sandwich place. Maybe I'm just hungry over here. But which weight? And so that's another option for you guys as well. Regardless, please do strength training. Please do strength training because that will stave off most of this stuff if you possibly can. Footwear considerations. We talked about the shoes. I'm not going to harp on that anymore. Speaking of gait, this is where I'm going to just kind of touch on it really quickly. Common gait issues that contribute to Achilles stress, overstriding is number one, first and foremost. So if you go way out in front of you, all that force comes up through your Achilles into your knee and then back into your hips and your low back. Insufficient push off. So if you're not getting into that full hip extension, oftentimes that can put a little bit more stress and strain on the Achilles. Because you're trying to get that range of motion that you're lacking at your hip, you're getting that now in through your Achilles. So that's a really important one. And building onto that, lack of ankle mobility. So if you really struggle with ankle dorsiflexion, so pulling that ankle back up towards you, so kind of your toes to the sky, that's also another one where if you have that, your Achilles is going to try and pick up the slack for the lack of ankle mobility. All right. So simple cue to get most of these done is essentially just increasing your cadence. So think of quick, light steps, quiet impact forces, right? Like you shouldn't hear on the treadmill, you shouldn't hear super loud banging on the treadmill. It should be a little bit on the quieter side. All right. So I've come up with what's called the 3 R's approach for Achilles pain. All right. And this is how we get into, okay, great. We know what it is. We know what causes it. Now, how the heck do we fix it? Okay. And this is like a general principle for the Achilles pain. All right, so I call it the 3 R's. The first R is reducing the pain and inflammation. First things first, we need to calm it down. If it doesn't get calmed down, those pain signals continue to go up to your brain, and your brain keeps saying, yo, stop doing what you're doing, you idiot, and stop running, right? And then you get this cycle back and forth, back and forth. So we need to make sure that we calm it down. But again, tendons need rest though. So we can't avoid total rest. Or excuse me, tendons need loading. So we can't avoid total rest. Okay. So it's important to calm it down, but we still need to give it some base level of loading. All right. This is the hard part. And this is where people struggle, is to take this first step and figure out exactly where they go. Okay. So think about this. Isometrics are key. So if you guys know what an isometric is, essentially it's just where you hold a certain position and you just sit there. All right. And so think of it like just a standard contraction, right? If you're holding a grocery bag, right, you just hold it halfway up. You haven't curled it all the way up towards you, but you're also too not all the way out. You're kind of halfway in between. Same thing here in terms of the Achilles. Think about you're standing on the edge of a stair, and we'll go over a few of these here, but think about you're standing on the edge of the stair and you're just holding it there. All right. The second R. So after we reduce pain and inflammation, now we need to rebuild the tendon strength and load capacity. Okay. I love this picture. It's some nice spaghetti. I don't know if I have any Italian in my family, but I feel like I should because I love eating pasta so much. But a nice healthy tendon is all lined up perfectly straight. Okay. The collagen and everything is all perfectly lined up. And an unhealthy tendon is kind of a mixed mash. So think about like cooked spaghetti, right? We want it to be very nice, orderly, and neat. All right. And that's where we need to start rebuilding some of that tendon strength. Your body is an amazing, amazing thing. It can help you reorganize and line up those spaghetti noodles perfectly. All right. But you need to have progressive loading in order to regain that healthy tendon. Your body will fix it over time. But if you jump and skip steps, it's going to be really hard. Okay. So when we talk about different exercise here, isometrics, eccentrics, and plyometrics are really key here. All right. This is where we start to get into more of the specific progressive loading. The third R is reintroducing running, but mainly reintroducing different types of running. Okay. I mentioned to you that I'm never going to make you stop running. That's true, unless it's absolutely awful and there you have pain and you literally can't walk. Okay. Otherwise, though, I want you to continue running. All right. But when we talk about hills, intensity, and progressing back to that full speed, that's really the third R. All right. That's the final touches on getting you back from Achilles into full running again. All right, is rebuilding and reintroducing you back into that full speed, pain-free running. All right, some exercises. So I kind of talked to you guys about the Achilles isometric holds. All right, and Andrew, I believe you were the one who told me they're the LaCroix of calf exercises. I freaking love that. I was dying laughing when you told me that, right? So LaCroix is kind of like your standard generic, like sparkling water, nothing crazy, but it's just always been there, right? And so that's the exact same thing. So the first picture on the bottom left here is exactly that. So it's the isometric calf raise or the heel raise. So essentially you just sit right at neutral, all right? So that's the first step. If you're having Achilles pain, try that to start. Okay, so that's 10 by 10 seconds. All right, where you just hold it right off that stair and then come back, relax, hang out where it is. Try double leg if single leg bothers you, but ideally you want to try and just get an isometric base. Okay, the second one is the eccentric. All right, so think of it like this. You're up on a stair again. I don't know why this lady in the picture has a backpack on, maybe for increased loading. Just kind of like a huge oversized backpack. But essentially you go up with both feet, you pick one up off the ground, and then you slowly lower back on one. And then you pick up with both, pick one off, and then slowly lower back down. The goal is to lower 3 to 5 seconds as you go down and really trying to do higher reps with this. So we're trying to build up more endurance into that Achilles. The last one is a classic seated soleus raise. So I talked to you guys about having soleus and how important the soleus can be to Achilles rehab, right? This guy just looks way too excited to be doing soleus raises. All right. I don't know anyone who's that pumped to do soleus raises, but it's really critical for runners. He has weights on his knees to give him a little bit more load. Perfect. Awesome. Totally fine. You can also do these off a stair or a step as well. Pull up a chair next to a stair and then, hold on to your weights and then up and then down, up, down, up, down. You can go from double leg to single leg. All right. Are these three exercises the key to you going from pain in your Achilles to no pain and running pain free? No, they're not, because there's a lot of steps in between. If you have questions about that, I'm sure you can talk to Andrew about that. There's a lot of things in between, but these are at least a few exercises where you can kind of wet your beak and figure out exactly like, okay, these feel good. Let me try these. Oh, these don't feel that great. Okay, let me go and kind of do a mixture of them, right? It gives you a starting point, a few exercises to try. So then you're not just sitting there scouring Dr. Google and hoping that you'll find some sort of miracle work that happens. Okay, so just a few exercises. So where does this leave us? I've talked enough here, all right? But Achilles issues don't resolve on themselves. Okay, so progressive loading is absolutely key. All right, and making sure you're not skipping steps. Strength training is a non-negotiable for runners, period. If you don't strength train, you do. You need to. It's super, super important to stave off injuries. Training errors oftentimes are the biggest culprit, but gradual progression is critical. Okay. And then, of course, if your symptoms persist, if they get worse, please, please, please reach out to a medical professional, myself, or someone else who understands endurance athletes and runners to figure it out. It's a lot easier to figure it out early on and nip it in the butt right away than let it linger for years or months or weeks or whatever that may be. All right. If you guys have more questions, I'm going to run over this super quickly, but I offer something called the Achilles Recovery Blueprint. So I give you a whole bunch of info. If you're feeling super overwhelmed, I got you. All right. Achilles pain is challenging. I deal with this all the time. I offer mainly the Achilles Blueprint mainly is a 12-week program. And the idea behind it is that it takes a long time for that Achilles to make changes, but that's the goal, is that it takes time and consistency to do that. So it's a 12-week program. It's customized. It's one-on-one support. You have unlimited messaging. We do gait analysis. If you have questions, by all means, feel free to reach out in any way, shape, or form. That is my shameless plug. But if you guys are really confused and want somebody who understands the Achilles and knows what's going on, I got you guys. All right. Finally, you guys get to talk. All right, questions. I'm gonna put up my contact info there. So if you guys have any questions, by all means, reach out in any way, shape, or form you guys desire. Instagram, my phone, that's my own personal cell phone here. So if you guys have questions, you can always text me on that. Otherwise, too, if you have any questions via email, by all means, send them away. I'm happy to answer those questions for you guys. Otherwise, what questions do you have?
I guess I have kind of one. Just started kind of dealing with what I think is Achilles tendonitis.
Okay.
But I have a affliction for just liking to run uphill. So it kind of came up after one run, and it was it was not the insertion point, kind of like just above that, and and it was kind of one of those ones where like I've actually like just kind of did a little bit of a protocol, and it's kind of knock on wood gone away right now.
Good.
So just in the curiosity of that, it's like the uphill, like you said, the uphill running kind of triggers that a lot. And then if it starts to do that, kind of like that, I just kind of backed off, kept running, but kind of kept it flat and it wouldn't bother me. And then I've just this week started going back to doing like more uphill run, and it's been pretty good. So it's just kind of being able to back off, but like not letting it get out of hand. I kind of like started feeling it, and I just was like, I don't want to deal with this seriously. So
Yes. No, absolutely. And that brings up a great point, right? There are a lot of different things, and I think you did a really good job of trying to alter that and trying to alter some of the stresses, right? So you kept your runs flatter, right? Maybe a little bit less intensity. Going uphill, yeah, puts a ton of stress on that Achilles, right? Because if you think about it, right, as you go uphill, that Achilles is just stretch, 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 stretch. And especially too, the steeper you go up, the more it's stretched, right? So now all of a sudden you're stretching it way more versus like a little mini gradual uphill is just a little bit versus a big bit when you get steeper. So oftentimes if something like that happens, bringing the incline down, all right, so you can still go uphill. I got nothing against you on that one. You can still go uphill, just don't go up super steep. Try and bring it down. If that still bothers you, go flatter. And then finally, okay, hey, this isn't working, go flatter again. All right, so the pitch of the trails makes a big difference, but also too, when we start looking at the intensity as well. If you're sprinting uphill, you're putting the most amount of load on your Achilles, right? If you are loosely jogging downhill, you're putting one of the least amount of loads on your Achilles, right? So you can kind of figure out where on that spectrum you are, right? So, okay, I'm sprinting up hills. Okay, cool. What if I just jog up hills? All right, great. What if okay, wait, hold on a second. Jogging up hills still hurts. Well, what if I go jogging on like some rolling terrain? Okay, that's okay. Okay, great. So then start there and start to work your way up to more and more some of the steeper stuff and the more intense things as well. But yeah, I think that's pretty much spot on.
yeah, one of the other things I deal with, I have crap mobility in my ankles. And so when you said that, that kind of led, because I never have dealt with Achilles issues, and this time was only like on my right leg, and I have really bad ankle mobility. And so when you not knowing that and hearing that was kind of one of those like, oh, that might be it too, because you're talking about like the push off. And I know that like when I'm running, I feel like I'm missing like 15-20% of what I could have.
Yeah. So absolutely. So like here, I'll give you well, this doesn't really move because it has screws in it, right? To hold it together. But I'll give you an idea of why that's so important. So and Caitlin, thanks for raising your hand. I'll get to you here in a minute. So when we talk about Achilles or talk about like ankle dorsiflexion, right? So if we bring this and we go up, right? Which is the most ideal, right? To bring it back towards you, right? If you're laying down, bring that back towards you. So if you can't go here, right? Your Achilles becomes more and more tight back through here because it now all of a sudden it has less range that it has to move through, right? And so then what happens is then it becomes really stiff because you're getting more forces in through here. And when you get more forces in through there, then all of a sudden that can lead to overuse in Achilles and stuff like that. So the ankle, like, and again, you can see this on a gait analysis, right? Like you can see if they're getting into push off and how much mobility their ankle has, right? And you can tell if they're actually being able to get enough dorsiflexion to take the load off the Achilles. So if the dorsiflexion, if up here is tightened up here in the front side is tightened up, your backside is what picks up for it. All right. The Achilles loves to be the protective older brother, right? It loves to help out, but yet the younger brother, aka your ankle, is perfectly capable of fixing itself, right? But the older brother's like, oh, dude, don't worry, I got this, I'll help you out, I got you, right? And then we build into that compensation pattern, especially as runners, because you do that. How many steps do you take in a run, right? Like now all of a sudden it's just that micro little bit, and over time that grows to be a lot of it. So yes, absolutely. Yeah. So try some ankle mobilizations and mobility drills to try and help open that up. I will make a note of that and I'm going to try and post some on Instagram because that is something that I haven't touched on yet that I should. So awesome. Cool. Does that answer your question, Taylor? Does that help? Perfect. All right, Caitlin, you had a question.
Yes, and actually, I just didn't want to forget it, but Taylor, that was a really good point about the flexion and like the mobility because so first question is my boyfriend just bought those ankle braces that you wear when you sleep and like laying around the house and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
Have you seen effectiveness with those at all? Okay.
No,
Because I
no,
mean, honestly, he's like, how do I even sleep with this? I'm going to lose hours of sleep just trying to have this on my foot.
yeah, no. Honestly, if he can return them, that's the better use of his time, energy, and money.
Uh,
A lot of those things are unfortunately just band-aids.
yeah,
And but if that helps him though, the only time that they've ever been beneficial is if it helps them get out of that first R, reducing that pain and inflammation.
yeah,
So if it allows him to get out of that pain and inflammation cycle, where now he can move on to rebuilding that tendon strength and load capacity, then it's worth it. But I'd say most people though have a ton of trouble sleeping with those things.
yeah,
They're bulky, they're uncomfortable, they get caught in the sheets. Like name your problem with them, and like it's probably true, right? Because there's um, so many issues that those have. They're good for a very limited, small sector of people, and then they do a really good job at marketing to try and get everyone else to buy them to in hopes that that it's a that it's a fix. But more often times than not, you're better off like investing in your body than you are investing in a brace or something else, if that makes sense.
yeah. And then I did have one more question that makes a lot of sense. And actually tying it back to the 3 R's,
Mhm.
reduce inflammation, rebuild, stuff like that. So then again, investing in your body. He's been dealing with this probably since early fall, end of summer, so August, September
Yeah.
time frame. How long do you usually see that process of like how long, I mean, if it's still flaring up, does he still need to be in that first phase of like reducing inflammation? And then when do you know to start again going to like rebuilding? He does go to the gym every once in a while. He does some PT and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then like when should he be implementing running again? So because he kind of runs periodically.
Yes, absolutely. This is like the $1 million question, right? This is like, tell me your secret sauce. I will tell you some of the secret sauce because it's not a secret. All right. It's really the challenge, all the information that you need is out there, right? And it's probably stuff that you've already read. It's the hardest part. Like when I do physical therapy, I call it's an art and a science, right? And I have to blend the science with the art. The science is here's an exercise, this helps with this pathology. The art is, well, when the hell do I use it? Right? So when do I use that exercise? And timing is really critical, right? So if he's in that first stage of reducing that pain and inflammation, right? You want that to be a 3 out of 10, maybe a 4 out of 10 or less. All right. So you want that pain to be down. Okay. Getting total pain free before you run is unreasonable. It's really challenging to do. Because no matter what, anytime you get that pain down and then all of a sudden you're going to restart running, you're going to have pain with running, right? Because that's just the nature of the beast. So if you look at that approach, right? The 3 R's, right? Reduce the pain and inflammation. We want to get that to a reasonable level. Okay. So 3 out of 10, maybe 4 out of 10. And we want it to have spots and times throughout the day where it goes away. During the runs, yes, absolutely. That happens. Totally fine. Once we get into the rebuilding tendon, we're in the same boat in terms of that pain and trying to help still calm that and nick that in the butt. What will happen is in this second phase and rebuild, what will happen is you'll start to see, well, like it takes maybe 3 steps instead of 12 steps or 8 steps in the morning for that soreness to go away. Right. And then it feels okay. Oh, during my run, like I only feel it like during my warm up, like 3 minutes into my warm up, and then it goes away. Versus before it was, oh man, it was like the whole 20, 30 minutes before it finally went away. Or Okay, like before I could only run like 2 miles and now I can run like 6. Okay, cool. Like that's the rebuilding, but you still probably have some of that lingering 3, 4 out of 10 pain, which people don't like because what they want is they want pain-free running. And that's the goal. But the hard part though is that that tendon, remember, because it doesn't have much blood flow, it takes a long time for that to change, for that change and that tendon to happen. So when you get into this final stage, this is like where, if you're super consistent, this is like anywhere from week 8 to 9, 10, where all of a sudden now it's starting to go, oh, like I only had a few bits of pain, but it was like right away in the morning, that was it. And my run was great. Right. And keep in mind, remember too, that I had, where is it? The graph up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down, right? That is truly the case because some days it's more inflamed than others, right? Because remember that tendon likes loading, but it's a fine line between not enough loading and too much loading, right? And there's a very small window that you have to try and hit and nail. And that's really the goal. And that's why people struggle with it, is because to hit that narrow window, you got to know what signs and symptoms you're looking for in order to adjust as needed, right? So people will either not load enough and then it just stays there and they're like, well, this is dumb. I've tried strengthening, I've been to PT a few times, like nothing seems to help. Or they go on totally the opposite side of that. And now all of a sudden they're like, yeah, well, like I tried to like pump out like 300 calf raises a day and now it's like really inflamed and it hurts. like you guys laugh, but
That
literally these
one
are
sounds
things.
accurate.
Yes, but you guys literally laugh, like this is literally things that I hear every day. And I'm just like, okay, so let me get this straight. So you went from 0 calf raises, 0 calf exercise to 300 single leg calf raises in a day. They're like, yeah. I'm like, does that sound like it might be too much? Yeah, probably, right? Like, holy cow, it's like going from 0 to 100, right? And so the challenging piece with Achilles is identifying that timing, right? And that timing piece and component of it, and trying to find that little sweet spot. In general, you want to keep running because that tendon needs load, right? So he should still be running of some sort, right? But if he can't even run like a mile and he's used to running like 6 to 8 miles a run, then you need to potentially be like, okay, we need to do a walk run program and we need to hammer strength and some rehab behind it to make sure that that is getting calmed down, because now he's in the pain and inflammation phase 100%, right? Once then he's like, hey, I can run a mile, I can run 2 miles. Okay, great. Perfect. Now we're going to start transitioning into that rebuild phase. And then once he's like, hey, I'm starting to run more. I did some hills yesterday and it kind of flared up, but flat is totally fine. I haven't had any pain for a week and flat. Great. Guess where he is now? He's starting to reintroduce a lot of those different running types. He's reintroducing getting into that full types of running. And now he's in that last phase. Now it's just a matter of, okay, let's finally kick the can down the road and fix it and get the rest kind of gone and rid of it forever, right? Finding that root cause. And then, okay, hey, what's sustainable now? Because that's another thing, right? Like you guys as runners, right? Like we love to run. That's exactly what we love to do. I don't know anyone who loves foam rolling after running. I have yet to meet anyone who loves to, stretch for hours on end and foam roll for hours on end after a run. I know I personally do not. I actually personally hate that stuff, but I just have to take my own medicine, and that's what keeps me quote unquote injury free or relatively injury free, is being able to do some of those smaller things and finding a maintenance program that works for me. Right. So once we reintroduce you, you're pain free with running. Awesome. But your work still isn't done. Now you need to figure out, hey, we need to strength train. We need to get you on a strength training program. Great. Look at all these gains that we've made. Perfect. Let's continue to build on to those. And now it goes from injury prevention to sports performance and beyond. Right. So now you're getting more out of it. You're getting into that performance side. You're, instead of, running, 7-minute miles, you're running 6 50-minute miles, right? Like you're finding those smaller gains, but also too, you're staying injury free. Does that kind of answer your question? That was very long-winded, I realize.
No, and I think again, just the progressive aspect is it takes patience. I think it's helpful understanding that it takes time, because some of the frustration is, well, how long should this take? Am I just causing more issues when I start running again and it's still bothering me? So
Yeah. In general, I would say, and Andrew, maybe you can chirp in on your experience with this too. In general, though, you should be feeling better within 2 to 4 weeks. Like if you're doing the proper amounts of the proper things, you should be feeling better within 2 to 4 weeks. So it shouldn't drag on for months.
Yeah, I would say that that mirrors my experience, where I did notice relatively quickly at least some improvement, right? Like think I just wrapped up week 6 heading into week 7, and it's not perfect, right? I'm not totally pain-free. I'm not running pain-free, but I have noticed a pretty consistent improvement. But I was at a point where before I started working with Dr. Sam, he talks about the early morning for that sort of like midpoint. Um, Kristen and I have joked about this. Like, I would get up in the morning and I couldn't walk when I got out of bed. I would like stand up, take the first step, kind of like have to support myself on the bed before I could like get moving again because of how stiff and painful it was. So I think I was probably pretty extreme in terms of how bad it had gotten. But I did notice relatively quickly, like, all right, things are slowly feeling better. The roller coaster is real. I was just telling Dr. Sam at the beginning of the call, like 2 days ago, I felt like a little bit more pain throughout the day. And I was, second guessing, like, do I need to take things back a little bit? And then yesterday, I had a really great day with very little pain. So, yeah, I think you can start to notice things relatively quickly. But I mean, uh, I I'm still doing kind of like the return to walk run intervals. It's way shorter than I'd like. I haven't been on trails in a couple months now, which is frustrating, but also, kind of just what I think it's going to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's like a very you're like the cookie cutter, like standard, like that's exactly how it feels, is like that portion of the roller coaster is definitely very much a real thing. But like even small things like you don't need like crutches getting out of bed, like that's a good thing. That's something that definitely is a benefit. And like again, that blood flow is so limited to the area and it takes so long to try and help rebuild that. So hang in there. Andrew's doing great, by the way. So kudos to you, Andrew, man. Keep on hanging in there. But that's a very real thing. But you should feel some sort of improvement within 4 to 6 weeks, definitely. Maybe if not sooner. I mean, I've had some people who go through like a similar program, and like they're like, oh my God, I can't get out of bed. And then like 3 weeks later, they're like, hey, this is great. Like I'm back to running. Like my runs don't hurt, but then, at night it kills me, so like it's very, very different from person to person. But in general, though, you should definitely be seeing some improvement within the first couple weeks. Awesome.
so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have more questions about that too, you can always reach out to Caitlin. I'm more than happy to talk to. And if you guys want to have a different or more in-depth discussion or something like that too, by all means, feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, Dr. Sam, thank you so much for joining,
Yeah.
talking to everyone. I hope that folks can avoid my experience of how much I went through before I ultimately said, all right, let's step back and fix this, because it is not fun. But it does sound like there are a few other folks out there that are going to benefit from all this knowledge. So appreciate you joining. Contact info was on the screen for anyone that wants to reach out. And yeah, happy Friday, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you guys. Obviously, I love talking about this stuff. So appreciate appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to chit chat.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.